Hi, I'm Michele Micetich. I'm the curator of the Carbon Hill School Museum and president of the Carbon Hill Historical Society. My family came here when the coal boom was on. They all came from Italy. All 8 of my great-grandparents came from Italy, northern Italy. When they moved to Carbon Hill, came to a town that quickly grew to a population of 2,000. And we're still here today, and you're in the Carbon Hill School Museum, which was built in 1893 and opened its doors to 300 students. My whole life has been spent here, so you might say that my expertise comes from what I've lived, as well as my career in education, which gave me an interest in research and genealogy and the land in particular.
What is the general history of coal mining in this area?
All of this area that we live in was Felix Township. So from Route 113 on the south end all the way to the Illinois River, and from the county line between Will, where Braidwood is, and Grundy counties, all the way over to Jugtown Road is Felix Township. That whole area has been completely mined. So Felix Township was called the Swamp. Glacial land or glacial era, had made the land quite swampy and unsuitable. It was established with a very few traders. Peter Lamset was a trapper who was here in the 1820s, and he found coal in outcroppings along the Mazon Creek, and he would sell it to blacksmiths and local people who just used coal because it was easier than wood. It's bituminous coal, which is soft coal, and it often gets a lot of sulfur in it. That's a different coal than anthracite, which comes from the east and is a harder coal. That was pretty much the role between 1810 and the 1830s. In the 1830s, we began to get settlers. Among them was the Peart family and George Woods. Those people mined coal in their farmlands just south of the Goose Lake Prairie land today. Those mines were called gin mines because they were individually run. It wasn't until the 1880s that we really saw a lot of coal developed here and ended up with shafts anywhere from 67 feet down to about 120 feet down. The farmers would get paid for the mine to be put on their property, and they would be paid whatever their yield had been on the farm before. So if you made $600 off your farm the year before, and you could still farm around some of that land, but now you had the coal mine, you got $600 for them to be working underground and leaving that dump on the top of the ground. The coal left the area on the trains, so you begin to see that the coal mines were owned by the train companies, were owned by the big investors out east. Almost all the coal that was sold here went to the Joliet steel mills to make the steels for rail and to the locomotives to fuel them. And that went on, from 1863-ish, I would say, with the Morris mines along the river and the independent mines, and then Braidwood's boom in 1865, and it continued on until 1927. By then we were sort of mined out shaft-wise because the men were getting paid too much and there wasn't that great of a yield from the coal and prices were competitive. So in September of 1927, the Northern Illinois Coal Company initiated its strip mining, and it went to the boundaries of where all these underground mines had finished and knew that the coal went that far. So you'll see all around our villages, around Carbon Hill, around the Goose Lake Prairie, around Braidwood, around South Wilmington, you will begin to see strip mining done with big machines. Better mines were in southern Illinois, and gradually mining closed out here in 1974.
Where did coal miners come from?
The miners who came here came primarily from Scotland, England, and Wales. They could speak the language. Their area of Scotland, England, and Wales had mining land just like ours. So they were the experts, they were the bosses. Their next generation of the Italians, the Bohemians, and the blacks, who couldn't speak the language or didn't have the political power, did all the underground mining in looking looking for that 3-foot vein of coal and working literally on their backs to get it out. At that time, you began to see two things, one good, one not so good. You saw the melting pot of the immigrants and the little towns established and everybody beginning to go to school and the nationalities intermingled. And then you also see the difference between the people who were the original landowners, the people who had the most money and the most education. And so there was a bit of a division.
What was life out of the mine like?
Miners lived quite poor, and most of them were good savers. They all had gardens. They all had grapevines. They all had cows and pigs and chickens, and everybody kind of took care of their own that way, which is why when the miners weren't working, they went down to the river and partied, and the men fished and the women worked. It may not have been the best food, but it was acquired at home. Their houses were essentially wooden boxes that the coal company usually were the ones that built it, and they might be 20 by 24. That'd be all they were. And of course there's no electricity, there's no plumbing, there's not even a foundation. A lot of times they're on railroad ties or on blocks or wood pilings. And so they would move their house from town to town when they went to another mine that was just starting up or more productive. But the miners lived very frugally. And like anybody who lived in those times, there wasn't a lot of medicine. People didn't go to the stores too much, and when they did, it was because they were forced to go to the company store. The coal mine owned the store, and so you had to buy all your tools and your shoes and everything you needed, and then that came out of your salary before you ever took any money home.
What were interesting jobs in the mine?
Boys went into the mines at age 9 or 10, most of them, to help their fathers, because then the father could get more coal. Young guys were called spraggers, and the coal carts, would run along a little rail underground as they got filled. And it's not level, you're going with the coal seam. So they'd pick up some speed, sort of like a little roller coaster in a way. Well, the spraggers had these pieces of wood that got thin on each end. These young boys would push those sprags in by the axle and the wheel to stop the coal cart. You're always pumping a mine because the groundwater's there. Always pumping the mine. Even when you see the strip mines, which are now all these lovely lakes where people boat and people have homes on, those were continuously pumped. That was a man's job, because otherwise the water would just rise in there.
What were some conflicts miners faced?
Men die horrendously in the mines when they would be going through a tunnel, and of course you've got all that land above you, and there's big rocks, glacial boulders, and all kinds of dangerous things. So they're supposed to prop up every 4 feet or so with a big piece of wood. They would want to hurry to get their coal out because they were paid by the ton, and they wanted to get as much out as they could. So sometimes they would say, oh no, that's going to hold. And then they got under there, pull the coal out, and the rock lands on top of them. Sometimes these boulders were 5,000-pound boulders, and they would just squish people. Safety conditions were also bad because the mining company would like to scrimp. But you remember, these people are going underground, and they're blasting, and they're dropping a lot of coal, and all that coal has what's called black damp. So the miners would get black lung disease. They would get blown up by deciding they were going to just test and see if there was any spark in there. Or they'd go, just like a cartoon, they'd go light the end of their dynamite charge and come far back, and then they go, this is taking too long, and then they'd run to see, and kaboom, they would blow up. So other than the fall of rocks, it was these explosions that caused a lot of deaths, and then cave-ins and disasters too. In fact, the diamond mine disaster of 1883 was from a flood in the mine. Top groundwater, remember Felix the swamps, February, water standing everywhere. Pretty soon there's a swirl, like a bathtub swirl. Water goes down, the young pumper notices it, yells for everybody to come up, but those guys are like underground a mile, and they can't get out. 70 of them drowned was terrible.
What happened when a mine closed?
So when a town closed its mines, it quickly evaporated, and we have many ghost towns. All in this area. Carbon Hill only has 400 people, but Cardiff has nobody. Torino is now in the bottom of the cooling pond at the Braidwood nuclear station. When the mines closed, even after the diamond mine disaster, many men said, "I'll never go back in a mine." And they went to Joliet to work for the EJ&E Railroad, or they went to the steel mills, or they went further south, or some of them were old enough to just retire.
Were workers unionized?
Of course, Braidwood and Coal City are the first place that unionized. The United Mine Workers unionized here under John Mitchell. Got the 8-hour day in 1898, and that's a whole fascinating story of strikes, which happened all the time, and lockouts, which happened all the time, and the miner company always wanting to bring in cheaper labor, which is why they brought in the blacks after the Civil War. They just kept marching them across and called them blacklegs. And then the black miners would get here. They understood that they would be the outcasts. So they would always side with the miners, and they would strike too, and then the strike would be over and back to work everybody went. The company's way of making money was, when the coal came out, it would be brought over these screens, a metal piece that has holes in it of different sizes, and they would shake the coal. Anything that fell below was not counted as part of what you brought up. And that was local, they just tossed that aside for people to use in their homes or nearby. But when there was a strike and the strike was over, they would agree on a different amount, maybe $1.10 a ton instead of, sometimes it went down to 67 cents a ton. It was all what you could get people to settle for. But the company would change the size of the holes in the screen. So they give you more money, but they made the holes bigger.
Where can you go to learn more about the people here?
So you can come right here. We're a member of the Will Grundy Genealogy Society, so we help people find their histories. And then the Coal City Library is a good resource. The Morris Library is a good resource. The Grundy County Historical Society, of which I'm a member of that too, is more general, but has information on the county. And of course, you go to the courthouse or the churches and you get more records. But if you just want to know about how people lived, we have in the other room, the north room, we have, I would say maybe 50 or 60 different stories of life in Carbon Hill and in the area, and a miner's life.